Welcome back, everybody. This is Real Estate Uncensored. Unfortunately, my co-pilot, the junior grandmaster himself, Greg McDaniel, is not here today because we have a very special guest with us, Martin Steller, and he is based in Europe. So we're recording this at a bit of an odd time. And so it's just me and Martin. We're talking about ethical selling. We've got a lot of stuff to get into. We're going to start off with something really, really fun, the one word that's illegal in sales. So we've got some fun stuff to go over. But first of all, Martin, an expert in ethical sales, a former monk, a tailor, a copywriter, like a Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
You
Thanks
may, in
for
fact,
having me.
be an international man of mystery. I wouldn't know, but I would not be surprised if you were
I
actually a
could tell
spy.
you, but then I would have to kill you.
Exactly.
Mm.
All right. So when you run into an ideal client now, what do you tell them that you do?
I help nice people sell more.
Okay.
So I coach and consult on growing a business, sales, and revenue in ethical ways so that you can get everything you want without having to feel that you're compromising your values.
Yeah.
Because nice people, people high in integrity, we don't want to do things that are opposed to our values.
Hmm.
And that is what I call the good egg problem, where the more somebody is a good egg, a high quality person with values and integrity, the more they end up sabotaging their results. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be that way. I solve that.
I love that. Yeah, we talked about this because you and I recorded another podcast episode for a show that's launching here in the next few weeks, and we talked a little bit about the good egg problem. It's a really funny analogy, and I love
Mm.
the way that you describe it. It's not just nice people; it's people with high integrity, which I think
Mhm.
people will identify with. There's a lot of very very high integrity people that listen to the show that are probably nodding their heads along, going, "Oh my God, that's me,"
Mm.
and I totally sabotage myself, and I feel like there's other people in my brokerage, other people in my office that are more successful, but I feel
Mhm.
like they're not, the integrity is not the same, and that's a crappy feeling to feel like you're
Oh, yeah.
seeing other people being more successful. So let's start off with something short and fun, and then we want to dig into some of the bigger principles and a little bit about your background. Before we get into that, what is the one word that's illegal in sales?
It's the word but. You should never reply but when somebody comes up with an objection or a question or a doubt or a concern.
Now, why is that?
Because when you tell the other person, but don't you see how valuable this is? Or don't you see, but don't you agree that this would be a fantastic purchase? And what you're doing is you're making the other person wrong.
Mm,
You are the one who has the wisdom and the insight, and Mr. Buyer, Mrs. Buyer has to see that. And because they're not seeing it, you are right. You're telling them how things are, how they should be seeing things, and they get to be made to feel wrong. And you should never
mm.
do that to a person, not in a relationship of any sort, whether you're selling something or not.
So how do you? Because I've got an idea based on something I heard from a previous guest that I've implemented to try to eliminate the word "but" from my vocabulary. How do you recommend somebody eliminate that?
Probably asking questions, try to figure out why somebody comes up with your objection. There's always a front facing reason for what people do, but there's also a background reason. And when you reply directly to what somebody states, you're dealing with what's on the surface. And the more you are able to figure out what's going on behind it, what is on a deeper level, the actual reason why they resist or object or protest, the more you build rapport and gain trust. And the more you develop in the other person the sense that, huh, they get me. They're trying to figure me out. They're trying to learn me, not in a creepy way. They're trying to really understand what my reality is about,
Hmm.
what things are like for me. And then that feeling of they get me, that is one of the strongest rapport builders that you can have. So when you can gain permission to, and you should ask for, so, instead of trying to push your agenda forward and acting as if you have permission to control the situation and to tell them what to do and to overcome their objections, ask for permission. All right, so I see that this is a difficult decision for you, or I see that the money side is a big problem. Would you mind if I ask you what's behind that? Or would you be okay with looking at it in a different way? So you ask permission to dive deeper. And if they give that permission, then they start trusting you more, especially if you keep away from trying to tell them how they should think or behave or react.
That's really good. That asking permission to see if they're open to looking at it in another way. So I've never thought about that. That's a really good one.
Hmm.
Here's the
But
tip that I picked up from a previous guest, and this is one of the mentors of mine. Listeners of the show will recognize the name Coach Hank Avink because he's been on the show a couple of times. But Coach Hank said, if you can just change the word bet to yet, or but to yet, excuse me, but to yet, that will help. Now, I won't like going a step beyond that and asking for permission, but is a step beyond that. But even if you can just eliminate the word, and so it's funny that got so ingrained in me for a while. In order to ingrain the habit, I would write an email to somebody, a team, a client, or whatever, and I would go and I would hit Command F and I would search the email for the word but. And I would see if the word, and I still do it in my copywriting, you know? Yeah. In fact, I also do the same thing with the word I,
oh yeah,
as in, you know what I'm saying? Like
yeah, yeah.
I force myself to use things like we instead of I in my
Mhm.
emails. And that helped a lot, you know, because I tend to be, I don't know what it is about my personality, but I tend to use the word but, and I tend to use the word problem instead of challenge. There's just some things about my vocabulary that I wish were better. And so I did make an active point to improve my vocabulary, and it starts with my writing. So
Yeah,
if that's helpful to anybody.
that's a really important one, especially the one about I. In fact, when you do the replace exercise, don't just try replacing with we, but also try replacing with you.
Yeah.
Right? And you'll break the sentence, but if you then
Mm-hmm.
go back and rewrite it, you're forced to rewrite it into a you message instead of an I message.
Yeah.
And your entire missive comes across a lot nicer. Because the reason why the word I is so bad in copywriting is that you make it about yourself. But when you're talking to a buyer, it's not about you, it's about them and their decision and their well-being and their reality, and they're being happy with the purchase, and they're getting clarity and making a decision that they are behind instead of being forced. It's all about them.
Mm-hmm.
And every time that you, same thing with the word but, when you reply to their saying but this or that with when you reply to their objection by saying but so and so, you are making it about you. You are the one who's right.
Yeah.
And that is the one thing where we automatically, not just Matt, you know, we all do that. Everybody is always talking about themselves and thinking about their own world. And that is where we fail to create a connection with people that gets them to move closer towards us, to
Mm-hmm.
participate in the sales process, to welcome you into asking even more questions so that they get more clarity, so that they can then get to a decision. Because what you're doing when you're selling is effectively you are coaching people through the process of making a decision. And that can be a yes or a no. And if you are a good egg, you don't care whether it's a yes or no. Your bank account cares, sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it should be in the buyer's best interest to choose, whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
The bonus is that if you truly are non-attached to the outcome and they do say no, you will show that you are not upset or hurt or um, disappointed in any way, which means that they will feel respected. They will feel like Chris Voss says, you know, the hostage negotiator
Mm-hmm.
teacher. So I feel respected by you. I'll talk to you again. That's what you get when you're not attached to the outcome, when you facilitate their decision and you make it very clear. Hey, listen, this is in your control. I am here to help you make a decision. I steward over this process, but it's your decision. And if it's a no, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that, then asking permission is just like in coaching. You know, you can't ask people, just like in therapy. You can't just go and throw very deep questions at people. You need to set a stage for that. You
Yeah.
need to ask them permission. Is it okay if I turn up the flame a little bit? Would you mind if we dive into this a little bit more?
Mm.
Selling is very similar in that there is somebody with a problem, a challenge, a desire. They are trying to figure out whether or not they want to do something about it, whether they want to buy a solution, whether they want to buy it from you under your conditions, terms, and they need help in figuring out what the best decision is.
Yeah.
So you're there to help, to serve, to coach them through getting the clarity that leads them to a decision.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. And I'm curious, like, before we get further into kind of the framework that you have for ethical selling, I want to give the audience a sense of how you arrived at these insights, because it's a really interesting story. So let's just spend a couple minutes and tell us a little bit about the journey from monk to coaching people on sales, because that's a very unusual progression. So
I know.
let's start there.
Well, was really interested in learning why people do the things they do. When I was in my late teens, I always wanted to help people, and I always had an insight into why a friend or someone I knew wasn't getting the results or the life that they wanted. And I was always trying to help them. Like, oh, well, you're doing it because of this, or you should do it that way. Who are you? Why are you bothering me? This is my life. Leave me alone. I'll figure it out. So the more I went and proffered my help, the more resistance I got.
Mm.
And so at some point, I developed this keen interest into figuring out people and myself. And then I started meditating, and I realized this is a very good entryway to get to this self-discovery. Instead of reading books and studying things, why not just go inside? And that's what I did. And I did read a lot of books, especially about psychology, studied a lot of things. And so that was the start of this discovery. Then after 12 years, and I left the monastery, I started a company because I became a tailor in the monastery. And so I figured, obviously, I'm going to start a tailoring shop and sell fine suits to people.
Okay.
And I had no idea about marketing or business or sales. In fact, quality sells itself, which
Of course.
$150,000 inheritance taught me is not true.
Yeah.
I lost all that money, went bankrupt. And around that time, I started writing articles for cash flow. And then someone said, do you do sales copy? And by that time, I'd learned so much about marketing and sales that I tried that. So I became a copywriter because it worked. Then transitioned into coaching. And that in the last year, 2 years, really has become focused on sales coaching.
Yeah.
Because somebody asked me, where's your heart? And like, yeah, sales. I mean, I love the whole, elegant dance of trying to work with somebody to get them to make their life better.
Yeah.
Oh, and if I do it right, I get rewarded. Woohoo! And to be able to teach that,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. So yeah, that was the start of the rebrand to not just be a general business coach, but like no, a coach for ethical selling.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about the what was the original insight that took you down the path not just of sales coaching, but sparked you kind of down the path of ethical sales? Do you remember any specific event or a particular experience with a client that sent you down
Yeah.
that path?
I remember in the weekly TV journal in Holland, where I used to read the articles and see the programming, the advertisements, where you'd see a man in a suit and tie, and then there was this long letter, and at the top it said "Dear friend," and then it was fake signed with a signature at the bottom. And I was like 12, looking at these advertisements, thinking, "You fucking liars! Can I swear on here? Because I'll do
Yes,
more if I
yes.
can."
Yes, it's called uncensored for a reason. Yes.
All right. I mean, I was young and I saw through it. Like, and you see, I saw the commercials on TV for white sheets and laundry detergent, and like, you people really are nasty pieces of work. The way you manipulate, and I didn't have any rational way to fit this in. I didn't have a model. I just saw this is lies, this is manipulation, this is nasty, and that's always been part of my life. That's just this real strong aversion and antipathy and antipathy against anything that is deceitful or scuzzy, or I really loathe people who do business in uncouth ways. And so,
Uh, and I'm guessing you didn't have the maturity at that point to discern that there's a way to sell that doesn't involve that. Did it get linked with
oh
sales,
no,
that sales was there for skeezy
oh
and
yeah, yeah,
deceitful
yeah.
just by definition? Yeah.
Marketing is wrong and sales is evil. And yeah, I had
Got it.
all the ridiculous
Yeah.
hang-ups, and that's how I started my tailoring company. I just need to do some blogging and some work on forums, and that's all. And that did work to some degree, but I didn't have any other sales or marketing approaches because I really thought that there was something wrong with selling, and it took a lot of coming to terms with myself also. Once I started copywriting, like sales copy, I remember maybe half a year or a year, I kind of struggled with this. Like, yeah, okay, so I know how the tricks work. I know how to write things that convince and persuade and convert. but I'm an ex-monk. How can I live with myself? And gradually I got used to the idea that, but if you do it in an authentic, if you do it in a way that's based in integrity and true concern and care and stewardship for the buyer, then there's nothing wrong with selling.
Yeah, agreed.
And why would there be anything wrong with selling? I mean, you go to a baker who's taking his $1.50 for a loaf of bread and tell selling is wrong. You'd be laughed out of the shop. There's nothing
That's
wrong
so
with
true, isn't
selling.
it? I know. Yeah, it's odd how that like some industries have an insane amount of resistance to sales and marketing, and others don't. It's natural, and nobody looks at it differently. When when somebody goes outside of a bakery and holds up a sign that says, "Hey, you should come in and buy my bread," it's like, well, I don't want bread today, but you're not wildly offended that they asked you to buy their
No,
bread.
exactly. No.
There's a great client of mine that's in the real estate space, and he was telling me a story one time that he grew up with a dad who, believe it or not, was in sales. He was in real estate sales, right? So his dad was in real estate. But when a telemarketer would call and there would be an interruption at dinner, his dad was furious.
Mm.
And so he linked the idea of being in sales with interrupting people and being a nuisance and a bother in people's life. And then his dad wanted him to get into real estate started having him making calls out of the family basement at 16, 17, 18 years old, right? It's like, well, those two things are in conflict. So he had to go back and dig into, well, why is there this resistance? And of course, he found a story very similar to yours, which reached all the way back into childhood. I think that's a lot of our listening audience probably has an experience like that. If you struggle with sales, you probably can find something like that in your background. I know both of us do, and that particular client. And he had to do a lot of inner work to overcome it. So you came across this kind of insight of, well, there's a way to do it in a more ethical way, a way that cares about what's best for the buyer. And that was kind of how you overcame that resistance to sales, right? So let's get into that a little bit. When you approach coaching somebody that's having those struggles, and obviously we don't have a real person in the therapist chair, so to speak, that you can interact with, but what are some of the first things that you encourage them to ask themselves or self-examine, think about, and run through to kind of uncover some of those false and limiting beliefs?
It's hard to answer like that because I usually approach this based on how somebody shows up, the cues that they give me.
Mm. Do you find that a lot of people have that same kind of background story in their developing years
Yes.
that creates that resistance to sales? Do you dig
Yeah.
into that specifically, or does presenting the framework in a different way to look at it, does that kind of give them like an escape hatch out of that limiting belief?
Both. Both. I don't tend to dig into history too much. I mean,
Hmm.
I'm not a therapist, and I'm much more interested in changing the story that somebody tells themselves at this moment than in figuring out why something built up from background and childhood and
Yeah.
history, ancient history, I call it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I ask questions to figure out what kind of um, definition, what kind of viewpoint somebody has on selling, what kind of story goes with that, what kind of beliefs, and yeah, then very important, what kind of values does this person have? Like, what are your top 3 values? And in what way do you feel that showing up to sell or have a sales conversation or follow up with somebody, in what way would that violate your values, the integrity that you live with that defines who you are on an identity level? So once you have clarity on that, then you can start working on those beliefs, because the beliefs are very often the root of the problem. When you learn how to change what you believe in or what you believe to hold as true, then you can slowly start changing also the way you define a thing. I don't know if I'm making sense, but
Yeah, it
sales.
kind of goes back to the 4 agreements, right? I mean, you've agreed with a wrong belief at some point. Once you're aware of that, then you can start replacing that, and you make a new agreement, and hopefully you break the old one. You start to move into new agreements, new ways of looking at things.
Yes. Yeah. And listen, one of the big outcomes I always try to work on with people as soon as possible is the understanding and the insight that All right, so we've all been exposed to pesky telemarketers and insurance salespeople, and all the ways in which selling is done wrong, very very wrong,
Yeah.
literally up to the point of shaming people. Like the other day, I turned down a guy from the Red Cross, and he literally started trying to make me feel guilty for not giving. Like,
Wow.
how much charity do you want me to give? I mean, you
Right.
little okay, so he was a 22-year-old. He didn't know he had his 2-day sales training, and he was just trying his best.
Yeah.
But all those ways of doing it wrong, that is 99% of how selling happens, or 90% in the world. That's the example that we have. So then we get this idea that if we are going to sell something, that means we have to be showing up and behaving the way that those people do.
Yeah.
No, you don't. You think that, and that is why your values are causing you to sell less. Let's flip that around. Let's make you one of the 1% or one of the 10% who are good at selling. It's a rare breed, but you can become that. You can become good at selling, not despite your values, but because of your values.
Mm.
You'll sleep like a baby. You'll never have to go against any of your values. You can show up in full commitment and service to a person's best outcome. You want to have a look at how that would work. And they go, is that possible? Yeah, that's what I do every day. That's what I teach. Let's have a look at how that would work.
Yeah. Yeah, there was something that my one of my coaches that I worked with in the past and a good friend of mine said, because I was asking him, I tend to judge myself a little harshly on my own sales ability.
Mm.
And he asked me to dig into it a little bit, and I explained, like, well, I'll have people come in, and there's certain ones that I'm really good at selling and getting them excited, and then there's others that come in that I'm just, like I just can't transfer that enthusiasm. Like I can't muster the enthusiasm to try to get them to sign up. And he just asked me a very simple question: were those your ideal clients? And I'm like, well, the ones that
Mhm.
I was worried about not being good at selling, no, they weren't my ideal clients. He's like, well, do you have any issues getting your ideal clients to sign up? Like, zero, none. I love them
Mhm.
to death and they have a great time on the phone. He's like, well,
Yep.
stop worrying about it, because you're trying to, like, don't beat yourself up for not selling well to the people that you shouldn't be selling to begin with. And that was
Yes.
a huge light bulb moment for me. And I think there's a lot of people that judge themselves harshly for not selling to people they shouldn't be selling to.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That's one of my big hangups, and I write about it a lot. Is being able to filter out people and having the guts to say no,
Yeah.
to realize who is disqualified, and it, and then
Yeah.
to be able to say, all right, so I'm not going to engage with that person. If they come back, maybe we will talk, but I'm not going to follow up. I'm not going to do any work for this. This is not a perfect fit. Pass. Next.
Yeah.
Because there's a whole world full of people who need stuff, who need houses, who need cars, shoes, coaching, you name it. And you're going to be trying to engage with somebody who's too busy, who's not interested, who doesn't have his mind in the right place. Why? You're wasting your time and their energy, right?
Yeah.
Park these people, move on, and start talking to people who actually are a potential good candidate. Because
Mm-hmm.
the fact that somebody, I like Derek Sivers' hell no or hell
Mm-hmm.
yes or no model, right?
Yep.
Because there's no such thing as hell maybe. So a lot of people, when we're trying to sell, a lot of people think, well, um, it might not be a perfect fit, but it could be, so let's try.
Yeah.
So then we have this pipeline where there's a lot of dross, a lot of low quality opportunities. When you sit down and you really look at those opportunities and you ask yourself, should this be a no? Then the majority of them, you're going to know that, yeah, there's no rapport, or yeah, they really won't have the money for this, or these people are not coachable. Like some people just are not coachable. I had to turn down a really big opportunity the other day because I felt that, yeah, this person isn't going to be coachable.
Yeah.
It was a
It's
big,
tough.
big ticket product, but it is such a liberating and healthy thing to do to say, okay, this is going to be a no. It's not a hell yes, therefore it's a no. Because it was eating my mind. How am I going to reply to this? Oh no, there he is again, and he didn't reply to my question. So now I need to address his statement, and all this churn, all these cycles in my brain. It's a waste of time. For what? For somebody who's not going to buy anyway. And if they do, they're not going to be happy because they're not coachable.
Yes.
Why am I even engaging? No, out. Clean up the dead wood. You want your pipeline to be small enough to support you, but filled with high quality people.
Yeah.
Not large enough, small, but large enough to support you. But make sure it is that there is no dross in there, no dead wood.
Yeah. I like it. So yeah, definitely have a better filtering mechanism and the willingness and the guts to say no. So you disqualify the people that aren't a good fit. I like that. We talked a little bit about kind of the first big belief shift, just being that it's possible, for someone with high integrity to also be good at sales. It may be rare out there, but you absolutely can do it. So so we've got two big mental shifts. What's another big mental shift that you feel like people need to go through to actually be good at ethical selling?
Focus on people who have shared values.
Shared values. Okay. Explain that a little bit.
Well, when you care about the same things as other people, as the other person, when you get riled up by the same things, when you would get on a barricade as for the same things that they would, you have a lot in common, right? When your values match or overlap, and this ties in with your beliefs, your worldview, and your identity, but values are very easy to identify. Then the moment you engage with that person, you already have rapport. So I bias very strongly when I do outreach or pitches. I look for people who wear their values on their sleeves, because then I can tell, do they care about the same things that I do? Because when they do, if they do, then rapport is already there the moment we connect. So that is a really easy way to filter for higher quality opportunities. Now, in real estate, that might not always be possible. But then again, if you have 25 people that you are in communication with, you can probably look for 3 or 4 or 5 of them where you do have that shared values, and then focus your attention on those people. And you're likely to move that deal forward faster because of those shared values.
Yeah. So if Greg was on the podcast, here's what he would say. And I won't do a Greg imitation because that would be a disservice to the listeners. Okay. So Greg would bring it back to, you would uncover their values through the conversations that you have about why they are even looking at making a decision to make a move, or in this case, like, purchase or get out of a piece of real estate. So I think he would bring it back to Frog, right? Family, recreation, occupation, and goals. So, or you could say Ford: family, occupation, recreation, dreams. So I think he would dig into those 4 things, and he would ask why questions. Why are you looking to move? Why is that important to you? What does that give you the ability to do? What would that mean for you if all those things worked out? And by the time you drill into that level of questions, like why, you'll start to get a sense of what people value. And you'll start to get a sense of, well, I'm moving because I need, just a very practical example. Well, we're outgrowing the house, and also I need an at-home office now, which I never used to need to use. Okay, well, tell me a little bit about that. Like, why are you working from home? Is it optional, or well, I'm choosing to work from home because I want to be close to my family. Great. Kids' ages, like how old? Like, oh, they're all under 10. Great. You want to be around for that formative time of their life. You deeply value the relationship with your kids. Why is that? Tell me a little bit about that. Why is that so important? Well, my dad wasn't really around because he was always working on his business, or he was in the military. We never saw, like, you get, like, it only takes like 3 questions and you start to get into some really deep areas and see what people really value. So I like, in a sales situation, when you're dealing with just kind of the general public, it's really easy to think, well, they're all my potential clients. Well, not really.
No, they're not. No, only the ones who end up paying you are your ideal clients.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's not everybody. So stop thinking that it's everybody.
Yeah, I love it. Shared values.
About that, Greg's method of asking why, I want to put a post-it on that one. Careful with asking why, because that can be perceived as an interrogation or an accusation.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's a lot of tone, body language, different ways
but
to
also
phrase
the
question. Yeah.
Right. Instead of saying, why do you want to work from home? You can say, what has caused this to shift? What made it a now thing to start working from home? Right. Because why is very often an accusation question. even if you don't mean it that way,
Mm-hmm.
it can be perceived that way. And listen, it's not about your intentions. The message is never what was sent. The message is what was received.
That's
And if
true.
you're not careful with your wording of things, then you can inadvertently trigger psychological reactance because people feel blamed, made guilty, made wrong, just because of the wrong words. So
Yeah,
careful with the
like if
why.
you, yeah, there's a difference between asking someone, "Oh, why are you thinking of moving?" or versus, "Oh, what got you thinking about moving?"
Hmm.
Like just that simple, just a little tweak, same
Hmm.
body language, same tone, same everything, just a
Yes,
little bit of the tweak of the phrasing can still get you the result that you want in terms of digging into the why, but
absolutely.
without triggering resistance. Yeah, 100%
And
agrees.
if you ask, why are you thinking of moving? That is a very difficult question to answer because it can be, so many replies. There can be so many reasons why, and they have to answer that, and they have to pick a part of the answer that fits in the conversation and that hopefully helps you with whatever work you're doing trying to sell me a house. It's very difficult. If you ask, what made you think of moving? Well, that's a very nicely pointed question. What made you think? Well, I started thinking about it when this or that happened. Right.
Yeah, it
So,
gets them to focus on just the catalyst, the events, or the things that transpired that got them thinking about it. I
mhm,
like it.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's the same
yeah.
thing as the opening question, right? So the way you
Mm.
present a question determines whether you're going to get a quality answer. So I think yesterday I wrote about the opening line in a meeting, where sometimes you ask somebody, "Hey, how are you doing?" And you get this 10-minute update on how everything is going in their life, and you're not going anywhere. You're not learning anything useful. You're not building rapport. They're just going off on one, telling you about how things are going.
Hmm.
It's the worst way you can start a meeting. So instead, you want to ask, "How have you been?" Because how have you been? That's not an open question. How have you been ends here and now. Everything up to this point is how I've been up to this point. So
Interesting.
you don't give people an invitation to just rant and talk about whatever. You're giving them an invitation to give you a quick little update on how things were up to the moment that we got on this meeting.
Hmm.
Right? So the way you formulate your questions is really important. You want to make sure that you ask questions that help people get clarity, because without clarity, they don't get vision. And without vision, they don't make a purchase.
Yeah.
So make your questions, and you can't get all technical, strategic about it because then it becomes artificial and then you're behaving like one of those salespeople.
Yeah.
We don't want to be like that. But you do want to make sure that you protect the quality of the conversation. Your job when you're selling something is to steward over the process of decision making, for which clarity and vision is required, and for which you need a quality conversation. That's your job. You're not there to sell. You're there to make sure that this is the best conversation with a buyer or with a seller that they could have had at that point.
Hmm.
What makes a good conversation? Clarity and insight.
Yeah.
Mm.
I love it. Okay. So I want to make sure that we send people to your website, and you're going to be appearing on some more podcasts. So I'm sure your name will start popping up
Hope so.
in my listeners' world. So Martinsteller.com. What can they find there? And then I want to get into a couple more things before we shut it down. But just what can they find on the site, and what do you sell? What do you offer to people if they want your help?
Yeah, well, on my site, there's different options for the kind of help, whether you need coaching or consulting. I have a whole bunch of articles. There are like 500 articles about all the different kinds of elements of um, ethical sales and business growth, mindset, but also strategy, communications. Sign up for my email list. I send a daily email, short one, on topics like these. Um, they're much shorter than these conversations. Uh,
Yeah, we get into some deep stuff whenever you and I talk. I like it.
well, yeah, we do that, don't we?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's I enjoy it. I enjoy skipping like little small talk here and there, and then bam, right to the deep stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's my favorite kinds of conversations. So martinstellar.com, sign up for the email list, get the blog. The blog articles are fantastic, and I like the email, just the rhythm of
Mm.
that level of communication with somebody in short bites. I've always admired someone like Seth Godin, who's been
Oh,
publishing
yeah.
basically and essentially a daily email or whatever on his blog
Mhm.
for 20 something years. I
Mhm.
mean,
He's the one who inspired me. Yeah.
was he? Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I've always admired that level of, I don't know what you call it, prolificness in terms of writing, but also just it means like I can tell he's always thinking. The wheels are always turning on something,
Yes.
and I know that you're the same way. Um, I want to talk a little bit towards the end about maybe non-attachment to the outcome, because it's a lot easier. It feels like it's a lot easier to be non-attached to the outcome when everything is secure. When you are on the climb, when you're on the way up and you're still kind of establishing your business, you're in the first several years, or maybe you're a new agent or you move to a new area. I've got a call with an agent friend of mine who just moved to a new city and is essentially starting her business from the ground up.
Mhm.
So how do you go into a situation like that where, I mean, your bank account says you need the money, and you want to be ethical, you want to create the best decision for them, you want to be non-attached to the outcome, but in the moment your bank account and your fight or flight system is telling you, no, this outcome actually does matter.
Mhm.
Let's get into it. How do you deal with that? How do you make sure that you still put the person on the other side of the table first, so that you maintain your integrity even when you're in a situation where your mind and your brain is screaming at you to do your best so that you close this sale right in front of you?
Mhm. Mhm. Also, there is uh, two areas, right, where this is wrong and this is right, and you
Okay.
know what falls on which side of the line. Problem is the line is not a line; it's a gray area. We all move through different levels of operating with integrity, or taking a liberty, or speaking a half truth, or because we can justify the bit. So there's a gray area that you go through sometimes. How broad is that gray area? Where do you want to be? I don't have an answer for you. This is everybody's individual decision as to how much do you want to stay true to your values and your integrity. Do you want to go for a sale because you need it so much, even if you know that it's not the ideal house for this person? Yeah, that's up to you. I cannot judge other people's decisions. Uh, um, I have my own personal definition of the gray area and where I stand. For other people, I don't know. It used to be, I've had those situations as well when years ago, uh, uh, when I wasn't in a situation like this, and I really did need the sale. Yeah, I had to really make sure that I chose my own integrity over solving my short-term problem.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's difficult. And yeah, if you need the money or there's wolves at the door and you're not getting the sale when it really solves so many problems, man, that sucks. How are you going to not be attached? I'm an ex-monk, and yes, I was attached. I felt awful about it and stressed. It's unavoidable.
Mm-hmm.
But remember, if you are committed to doing right by people and being in business or being in sales for the right reasons, you are there to serve people. And that means you're doing it for the other person. And your reward for doing it right is getting paid. So when you're tempted to take liberties, remember, maybe this will help you, but then you're doing it for yourself. Then you're making it about yourself. This is not an act of service.
Okay.
And then, yeah, ask yourself what the best choice is for you in the situation. Maybe you should sell that house if otherwise they're going to be taking away your house. I don't know. I cannot solve that for people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a difficult thing,
Mm.
but I think you hit the nail on the head, which is your your own gray areas is individual to you, but
Mhm.
when you've crossed it. When you've really, if you have a decision and you have a action that you could take, or you have something that you could say where your conscience is telling you, okay, now we're getting out of integrity. Now we're getting too attached to the outcome and we're trying to make something happen that I feel like may not be in the buyer's best interest. And I think it's where it's that decision right there where you're doing it and you
Yeah.
do it anyway, like, and you feel that you violated your own integrity, like that's when
Yes.
you've crossed that line.
Yes. Your body will tell you.
Yeah.
There are sensations, tensions, and feelings of anxiety. There are signals that you can read that no, you're being out of integrity with yourself. And my belief, my personal conviction, is that if you avoid that behavior when you feel that, it will always end up best for you.
Yeah.
Even if in the short term it might be difficult, painful, hurtful, it'll always pay you back when you listen to the signal and stay on the right side of the gray area. on the good side. Oh, and it's an interesting exercise to ask yourself, if I take this liberty, let's say, would that be any worse than liberties I've taken before? Because if the answer is yes, you're on a sliding scale and you're going downhill. Shape up. Because once you start, if somebody steals an apple, then tomorrow it's not so difficult to steal 2 apples. And next week you can steal a sack of apples, right? Once you're in a gray area and you don't mind yourself very carefully, you start sliding. And then you end up possibly, doing crooked things. And that's not where you want to go. But if you're not mindful and aware that you are taking liberties, and sometimes they're a little bit bigger than the other one before, then you end up in a place where you don't want to be. And you end up hating yourself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, just in terms of the turning down that big deal, there's a story that Greg has told for years on the show, off and on. So some of the listeners may have heard this, but if you're new to the show, you may not. Greg's dad, who's been practicing real estate in the Outer Bay area for 40 years, I think maybe 45, something like that. 25 years ago, had a chance to list by that standard, a very expensive house. Mm-hmm. And the guy came to him and just said, like, hey, what do you think? I'm thinking of selling. And Greg's dad was like, honestly, you should hang on to it. And he hung on to it for 25 years. Mm-hmm. And finally came back around and called Greg's dad up and said, well, I'm ready to sell. You've made me $1.5 million in net worth by not letting me sell when I thought I should sell. It's like, I'm going to go take those, I'm going to sell it, and I'm only going to list with you. I will not have anybody else. No one else will be my salesperson. And so they did. They listed the house, obviously made a much larger commission, and more importantly, the guy was able to take the proceeds from one house sale and went and bought 2 houses in Texas. Nice. So yeah, so like it's such a visceral example of just Greg's dad doing the right thing a long time ago. It didn't pay off immediately. Now, granted, the fact that he was that way got him a lot of clients in the meantime, but it took a while for that direct action to lead back to a specific tangible result in a way that was very visible. But it did, and it was huge. And so it's just a really good example that we'd like to point out on the show. So good.
You never know how things are going to turn back in your favor. Like a friend of mine, he's way into his 70s now, doesn't have a lot of money, loves convertible cars. Always used to have cheap little cheerful old convertibles, very nice. And at some point I see him drive into town and he's got this really, really cool, slick, spiffy, like modern Mazda convertible. I'm like, where'd you get that? He's like, I ran into a guy from 20 years ago, and he was in trouble and I had money then and I lent him a bunch of money. I don't know how much, a couple of thousand or something. And he was so grateful because it was a real saving grace for him, and he was able to fix his problems. So he said, oh, you need a car and you don't have the money to buy one? Here, go and buy one, right? That's how the just doing right by a friend who needed some money came back to him decades later. Yeah. So he now drives this car and he didn't have to pay for it. So don't worry about how things are going to come back. Just don't be a dick. You know how to treat people right.
That's a great way to end the episode. Don't be a dick. I love it. Martin, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We always have good conversations, and I think we brought out some really good big ideas, big paradigm shifting beliefs that people can latch onto. And I hope people go and check out your website, read some blog articles. There's a book that you can get as well on the 10 rules for ethical selling, so they should go and get that and get on your email list and all that fun stuff. So I just appreciate it. And for everybody that's listening, obviously go leave a rating and review for the show on iTunes. That's super helpful. It helps put the show in front of more people. If you know other agents or other sales professionals that would get value out of what we just talked about, make sure to share the show or give Martin a shout out when you leave a review online. And as Greg would say, peace out, ninjas. We're gone.